Hey kids, it's Mrs. D. I know that I said I would wait till Thursday for some of the responses, but it turns out virtual Wednesdays are pretty good for me to be in the comfort of the old half put together office, having some coffee I had to alter because McDonald's coffee is potentially not real food, and had the rare occurrence of making me deeply unhappy drinking coffee, so I had to come back and divide it in half, add hazelnut and pumpkin spice. We're almost back to normal now. Anyway, this is the new Lunchtime with Mrs. Donahue video. 1. Thank you all for coming. It was cool to see some of my old students get back in touch with me. I didn't know how else to show you guys the videos, but to just send them directly to you. I suppose subscribe to YouTube. I hate being one of those people that says, please subscribe to my YouTube. Leave a comment. Hit the like button. Ugh. Turns my stomach. But I suppose that's how you'll have to follow me if you're not in the Google Classroom. If you are in the Google Classroom, please feel free to share it with anybody. It doesn't have to just be someone who's my student. I think they have to have a student account to be actually in Google, but you could always just share the YouTube page with them. There's nothing so awful in these videos. So for today's lunchtime chat, or I suppose second breakfast chat is really more appropriate as it's like 9 a.m. right now. The one vote that we received was for discussing Falcon and the Winter Soldier on Disney+. I was kind of hoping you'd go Captain Marvel because a couple students and I had some amazing Captain Marvel chats the other day after class. So I may very well do a Captain Marvel video in case some of you really don't want potential spoilers. And those potential spoilers after this little intro will be both for Black Widow and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and potentially for some of the other Disney Pluses as well. These are based on just a lot of internet scrounging on my point, and then just some hopeful wishing. I don't know if I'm right. Hopefully I'm a little right. I don't like being completely wrong unless they do it so well that I'm like, I was completely wrong, but I'm okay with it, which has occasionally happened. Sometimes, though, when they're completely off fan prediction base, you get Captain Marvel. Again, that video is going to come because the conversation I had with the kids was just too good. But spoilers, potentially, I don't know, might be real, might not be real, for both Black Widow and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and even potentially connecting into like WandaVision and Loki. So if you don't want spoilers, leave now. Go away, please, but with love. All right, so here's the dealio. We are in the darkest timeline. As the internet pointed out to me yesterday when I was putting the baby to bed, and what I have to do is kind of hope that he knows I'm ignoring him and scroll through like Tumblr and Reddit. So one person pointed out 2020 was the first year that Steve Rogers was not in the MCU. I've decided that this is the reason why everything has gone to hell. We lost Kobe. Steve's out of the MCU. We can fix one of these. Bring him back. Wouldn't be totally unheard of. Old Man Steve has occurred before, and he's actually been Old Man Steve and then been like, the world has fallen to hell around me, I have to get back in the game, and essentially super soldiers up and kind of re-youths himself and just comes back. So with enough damage done to the MCU timeline and Chris Evans feeling like playing ball, it could happen. However, that aside, the MCU is necessarily pivoting post-Endgame. I'm not going to say spoilers for Endgame because honestly, if you haven't seen it, why are you here? After Endgame, we lost our two big Avengers leaders. And Civil War sort of made it very clear to us, you were either Team Iron Man or Team Cap. But now we have to decide who is in a leadership position. In Endgame, it actually fell to Natasha for Black Widow. She became more of the sort of default, de facto leader, which was a moment of, I thought, really excellent writing. Although apparently there are many fans in the internet scrounging and thinking the Russos did a bad job writing all of their movies, which, no, they have the strongest writing team that exists in Marvel. I liked Natasha doing it, especially because she seemed really, not unworthy, but she seemed, I didn't want this, but I'll do it. I have to do it. I have to have something to focus on. Odd, weird moments of her and Rocket having to talk were amazing. Really well thought out characterizations. But with her gone, even though the Black Widow movie comes out, it's a Black Widow movie that is taking place directly after Civil War, which is before Infinity War. So after Civil War, where Steve becomes a war criminal, essentially to protect Bucky, and then they go into hiding. Bucky's in Wakanda getting fixed. Steve and Nat are out doing what they do with Falcon. We are getting Natasha apparently putting Steve and Sam aside. One does not know what they're occupying their time with because they found Bucky, but they're doing something. And she is allegedly in the Black Widow plot, going back into Russia by the Red Room, which is where she was trained, to find a computer chip or a flash drive that on it has a computer program that will effectively erase you from the world. So in other words, if you're a heavily wanted, accords violating former KGB spy who has now blown up all of her identities that she had curated over the years, you might want this reset button in order to not be on the run. And who knows, maybe she's actually having a magnanimous moment and she would give it to Steve. Although Steve's difficult position is that everyone knows he's Captain America. Like, you don't look at Steve and not think Captain America. But she could have also given it to Sam. I mean, we're probably looking at her doing it for herself. But at any rate, the Black Widow movie probably won't be looking at her necessarily in that same leadership position. So a big problem the MCU has going forward is who will lead the team. In the comics, some of the leaders of the team have included Captain Marvel, which if they have half a brain they won't use right now. They could include T'Challa, but pivot. They could include the Fantastic Four. Reed Richards and Sue Storm did a lot to guide the Avengers, and they're a natural thing to include. We don't really have too many X-Men in leadership positions, but they could include Storm, potentially. We also could see Peter Parker stepping up. I think it's fairly likely that you have to see the roles kind of go to different people. So, like, Tony's role was to be incredibly wealthy and incredibly brilliant, so that any time you needed a convenient plot fix, like we need a piece of machinery that, say, fixes time travel, you have Tony Stark to do that. If you are looking for obvious replacements, you have both Peter Parker and Shuri to do that. And they'd be an amazing combination. Would not the two of them have the most adorable, wholesome, like on-screen chemistry that you've ever seen? It would just do everything for me. You also have the weird MJ that they've developed. The issue here, of course, is that Spider-Man's not entirely owned by Disney. He's on lease. And whenever they feel like it, Sony can like dangle him in front of Marvel and sort of threaten to take him away. But their MJ character, I like, and I didn't want to like her because we've done MJ a lot. You could do like Spider MJ, like Spider Gwen, or you could do Ironheart with her. Would she not be a pretty cool Ironheart? And then you have like the person stepping up into the role. You have inclusivity with her being a person of color and a female, and you still have an Iron Man suit going around. You can get rid of Gwyneth Paltrow and Rescue. You can save some room for Morgan Stark in the next 10 years. It's going to be fine. Rhodey would be her mentor. It'd be kind of awesome. What does this have to do with Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Well, the big question is, you can take care of Tony's role. What do you do about Steve? Steve's harder to replace. The big thing about Captain America is that Captain America had his own moral code. He guided the Avengers the way he guided the Howling Commandos, which was always essentially, we have to do this job because we understand the cost. Essentially, you wouldn't get a committee to sit and agree to this. We understand the risks. We understand, but we know what we have to do. Captain America has his very firm, set moral compass. It's why he's willing to become a criminal when the law is going to do the wrong thing to Bucky. Now, he decided in Endgame, which I didn't realize was a controversial decision, that he goes back in time. I get that it sort of undermines the whole will not disturb the timelines thing. I get that it sort of undermines that. But you know, what we have canon from Peggy Carter was just that Steve saved somebody who would later become my husband, and she had kids. That's it. We don't actually see necessarily pictures of the husband when they scan through her bedside table. There are pictures of her, a man, and some kids. One might assume that that's a husband. It could be a brother. It could be someone else. They could have just kind of cleverly hidden Steve in plain sight. One thing about the Russos is they don't always explicitly state in the films some of the like headcanon that they discuss in planning stages. One thing I find really kind of intriguing in that is that in interviews they've basically stated two things. One, which I hope all of you knew, Steve was always worthy of the hammer of Thor. So in Age of Ultron, they have a big drunken Christmas party and everyone's trying to lift the hammer. And it's just funny because Tony can't and Rhodey can't, and Natasha says she won't even try. No one can lift it. And when Steve comes, he has his hands and it ever so slightly moves before he kind of goes, ah, and lets go. And Thor gives him a look as if to go like, and the Russos basically confirmed that Steve realized he could move the hammer and decided not to because A, the team were already kind of making fun of him because he told them they were speaking bad language on the battlefield. And also he didn't want to hurt Thor's feelings because Thor was like, only I am worthy of the hammer. So he didn't want to create a whole situation, so he just pretended he couldn't lift it. What a Steve Rogers move. And also they confirmed that the reason that Bucky's not more kind of visibly upset at the end of Endgame is that Steve essentially gave him the heads up. Like before Steve goes, he and Bucky had some sort of sit down and he was like, I'm going back. Do you want to come with me? Now this is the interesting moment. And it leads into Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Allegedly, Falcon and the Winter Soldier will open directly seconds after Endgame ends on that bench. So like old man Steve passes Sam Wilson the shield and then goes like, you're going to be a good Cap, Buck, love you, and leaves. And then Buck's left on the bench. And he and Sam are sort of like, And Sam's like, are you okay with this? Like, you've been his friend for 90 years and he gave this to me. And Bucky's like, yeah, he offered to let me come back with him, but I can't go back. So the Steve that goes back to 1945 and stays with Peggy is the Steve that has been through the entire MCU. He's lived through World War II. He's woken up in the 2000s. He's fought aliens and Thanos, and he's gone through the snap and the blip, and he's done it all. He has seen everything, and he is so world weary, and he understands that sort of his old school mentality of, I can fix it. I can do this all day, right? No matter how bad the problem gets, I can do it all day. I can take it. It's just going to keep happening, right? Over and over and over again. And the point is not that he is the one standing there willing to take it, but that someone is. That you need to pass that torch because he's going to be the only one who doesn't get like the Clint Barton on the farm treatment, which I'll be honest, when I first saw Age of Ultron, I hated, but it's grown on me. It's grown on me incredibly because, even Tony years later, after the snap, his big thing is like, I will only help you fix this if you do not harm my daughter. Like, you can't undo the snap. You have to just re-snap them. Because you can't touch the last 5 years or I lose my daughter. And that's why Tony had not been willing to touch it. And Steve was like, no, of course. We would never take her away from you. And Steve Rogers is kind of one of the few people you can trust. If he says we're not going to touch it, he's not going to touch it. Bucky can't be 1945 Bucky. Like, Steve's tired. Think of 1945 like his retirement. He's like, I put in my time. It's fair. I'm going back home. I'm going back home to the one thing that I missed. Bucky can't do that. What is he supposed to do? Go back to Brooklyn and knock on his family's door with a metal arm, looking incredibly different? I mean, just even the fact that the actors are, real world people who age, Bucky of First Avenger just looks so much younger and baby-faced compared to like the sort of chiseled soldier that we see in Endgame. We're not getting the same person. Like, what is he supposed to do? Go back home and see his family? They're not going to get their son back. What is he supposed to do? Go back right next to them on the same street and the same block and pretend it's all okay? Is he supposed to leave his home? Like, everything that he would go back for, he can't go back for. It's not that it's gone, it's that he's different, so different. So he basically tells Steve, I can't go back to the past. I got to work with the future. And then we apparently get a very big haircut moment from him because he is shedding the Winter Soldier and becoming Bucky again. But in the passing of the shield, Bucky still has a lot of growth ahead of him. Like, he's not completely ready to be in charge of all these other people because he's still not confident in his own sort of rehabilitation. We've seen a lot of progress. We assume the goats in Wakanda were really good to him. They might be. In the comics, Bucky takes up yoga and meditation, which I'm looking very forward to them doing some sort of like nod to the comics and maybe having Bucky do a little deep breathing exercises. Could be good. In the comics, I low-key really want this to happen. Bucky gets a cat. Her name is Alpine and she's a princess. She's an all-white cat. And according to the comic writer, Kyle Higgins, the story was based on Higgins finding his own cat, that Bucky's on his motorcycle one night and it's raining and he sees a box on the side of the road that looks fairly suspect. So he pulls over, finds a box of kittens, and they're like only a few days old and they're all dead except the white one. So he picks up this little all-white kitten and tucks it in his motorcycle jacket and takes it home and raises this kitten from a bottle baby. How much are you willing to pay to see Bucky Barnes bottle feed a baby kitten? Take my money, Disney. Take my money. I want to see him meditate with a white cat clawing its way up his back and sort of doing the cat nuzzle in his head, but that's me. And honestly, wouldn't it be a growing moment for Bucky? You need to consider that Bucky still has a lot to go through. In the comics, this series of trigger words is not exactly the same. There's another trigger word, and rumor has it that that trigger word is still in play. Not because we've undone any of Suri's conditioning with the snap blip nonsense, but because Suri didn't know one of the trigger words was there, because Bucky doesn't even know it's there, because it's a fail-safe trigger word that they never previously had to use. They could always restrain him enough that they didn't need the fail-safe. As opposed to like the Death Squad in Civil War, like the Civil War Death Squad clearly had different triggers. Like they tried different things with the conditioning and made them a lot more aggressive and a lot harder to contain. But they had to get them to settle eventually, so they didn't get tired. They probably had to do some sort of deconditioning word or deprogramming word. Anyway, codename Sputnik. Apparently you say Sputnik and Bucky drops like a sack of potatoes. I imagine that something very similar to the Death Squad happened, or how would you have put them in cryo-freeze? Anyway, we still have miles to go before we sleep with Bucky. He's not prepared to be the captain yet. Maybe. Especially because it only makes sense that military rank the sergeant goes up to be the captain eventually. Like, I want it. I do want it. And I have loved every moment that the Russos put in where he was, holding the shield and fighting with the shield with Steve. But he's just not there. Falcon, on the other hand, is much more mature, which is funny because Sam's always cracking jokes. But Falcon's just more emotionally ready to be Cap. Now, we might be there, but you have to realize that in the world of Marvel, post-blip, they had to deal with the fact that, the world went on without half its people for 5 years. So, things that used to be true are not true. Like, Natasha was wanted for violating the Accords, and so was Steve. But after the snap, everyone was like, I guess you're forgiven. Just come home. We're not going to do it anymore. You're not going to prison right now. We lost half the people in the world. We have bigger problems. But then after you blip them all home, you sort of set a weird precedent where you have forgiven certain war criminals because of the snap. So we have to deal with Bucky and Sam logistically. How can Sam be Captain America? Because he's technically a wanted man. The government's apparently going to cut them a deal. But this deal involves doing things the way the government has asked them to do it, which has always been kind of a pet peeve of Steve Rogers. He's happy to fight for America, but he also doesn't see America as necessarily its government. The government is necessarily full of people making different decisions than he is, and he is willing to ignore them when it suits the mission. We want Sam to be Cap for a lot of reasons. I think it's significant socially that we'd have a black Captain America. And it's not like weird outside the fan base. It's sometimes really hard when they go so far outside the comic books, because the comic books are very progressive. People want to dismiss comics as always being like this sort of white boy medium, but like there's an awful lot of times in the comics that they have pressed forth social issues, like way before TV and movies was doing it. So there's no need to like shoehorn in inclusivity and stuff like that. It's there. Falcon becomes Captain America. We're going to have it. He doesn't become Captain America in the show Falcon and the Winter Soldier. A lot of people have been like, well, why is it called Falcon and the Winter Soldier? He's not Cap. They are going to say, if you want to be Cap, you got to take the super soldier serum, which, point A, how do they have it? That was a whole thing. It got destroyed after Steve Rogers and they couldn't make another one. They have like the bastardized half-done version that the Russians stole and gave to Bucky, but Bucky's super soldier serum isn't exactly the same as Steve's. I mean, it's pretty close, but it's not the same. They took Steve Rogers' blood back in First Avenger, hoping that they could like backwards engineer the super soldier serum. But in the Agent Carter TV show, which they've done a weird job of saying, like, they say it's not canon, then they cast the Jarvis actor in Endgame. They should just kind of put Agent Carter in the MCU. They really should. But in Agent Carter, it was revealed that they were down to one vial of Steve Rogers' blood, and Peggy Carter was given it, and she dumped it over the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise, and it was like her goodbye to Steve. So, in theory, there's no blood samples from past Captain America left. Now, did Steve just give them new blood samples when he rewoke? Maybe. Maybe they just took them. It's never really been a thing. We've always managed to find serum as an answer for Steve and even for Bucky, but it's not necessarily always easy to find. And if they were just able to mass produce super soldier serum, they would have. The show will allegedly state that whatever version of the serum they have has killed many of the people that they've tried to give it to, which is kind of is par for the course. When Sam asks Bucky what he thinks about the serum, Bucky's response is something to the effect of, you don't want to outlive everyone you love. This creates a weird dynamic. So Steve and Bucky were able to look as young as they did because they kept Bucky repeatedly getting frozen, but Steve was frozen for 70 years. It's not that they had super long lifespans. In the comics, that's one of the versions that they have, that both of them are sort of like incapable of aging at a normal pace, that they age super duper duper slow, so that it is still Steve Rogers from 1943, even though it's 2020, and he's just slightly old. That it makes it its own weird dynamic that they outlive everyone. They haven't covered that in the MCU yet, so I don't know that that's a fair response. At any rate, the serum is its own thing. Bucky never wanted the serum. If he hadn't had the serum when he was captured, he would not have survived the fall from the train. He would have died. He wouldn't have had to be Winter Soldier. So he's got a little serum chip on his shoulder. His advice to Sam is basically don't have the serum. Sam takes that advice, says no to the serum, so the government takes the shield. And they give it to the guy who becomes U.S. agent or Captain America. In the books, he's a bad guy. But they might kind of play with that a little bit. You need a few anti-heroes. You need people who are like sometimes good, sometimes bad. I think they're probably going to go that way with U.S. Agent. U.S. Agent is basically a kid who looked up to Steve Rogers his whole life and became, a good military man. Think of First Avenger like the guy that the colonel wanted to get the super soldier serum, like a soldier's soldier, a man's man. He looks up to the chain of command, respects it. But that guy, the reason that they didn't give him the serum was the scientist said he's a bully. And we don't get the impression that U.S. Agent is a bully. But nonetheless, there's an issue with the serum. The serum has been modified to include a new component, which is control. mind control, something almost akin to Loki's scepter. When you give the serum to people, it supercharges them, but it makes them do what the person in charge says. Can you guess who the person in charge is? Thunderbolt Ross. You may recognize him from the Incredible Hulk movie. He is the he is the father of Bruce Banner's would-be love interest, Betty Ross. And we haven't seen her in movies and movies and movies. But he was snapped and then blipped back in. So in the 5 years that he was gone, all of his punishments of Captain America and Sam and all that were undone. And now he comes back and he's like, the problem here might not be superpowered people, enhanced people. The problem here is that they do whatever the heck they want, and they don't listen. So if only we could get them to listen, maybe we'd be better off. Hence the control factor in the serum. And of course, Big Boy Ross wants to give himself the control. He eventually becomes the Red Hulk. I don't know about you, I'm excited for Red Hulk. I need to see Professor Hulk gone. He was an adorable addition to the Endgame franchise. I really liked that they went Endgame Professor Hulk. However, we just don't need Professor Hulk. We don't need him to stay around. We could do a billion other versions of Hulk. That's one great thing about the character is he's unstable, so any kind of plateau he reaches where you think that it's going to be okay from now on, it always inevitably breaks up somehow. So now that Natasha's gone, maybe we bring Miss Betty back. Liv Tyler's not doing much right now. You give her a call. Why do we care about Black Widow with this? Well, in the Black Widow movie, allegedly, Thunderbolts will be introduced as the end of the movie. So it will be revealed that Taskmaster is the villain of that movie. That's fairly wide knowledge right now. If you're paying even a little bit of attention to Marvel, you'll see the Taskmaster is the proposed villain for Black Widow. But allegedly Taskmaster and her sister have taken the super soldier serum, gotten the mind control blip for Thunderbolt Ross, and they will become members of the Thunderbolts, which is it's another hero team. Marvel seems to be setting up several hero teams. They did this a little bit in the earlier franchise because you had Guardians and then you had the Avengers, but they're going to double down on teams right now. We're going to have, I would imagine, Fantastic Four, X-Men. You're still going to have Guardians of the Galaxy. You're going to have Avengers. You're going to have the Midnight Suns with Ghost Rider and potentially Punisher, Moon Knight and all that. Doctor Strange is in that. You potentially have the Illuminati was low-key rumored, and you're going to have the Thunderbolts. And now the idea is going to be, well, you have all these enhanced people on their different teams, and who's right and who's wrong. The Thunderbolts aren't always necessarily bad guys, but in this case, they're going to be on the leash of a bad guy. So Thunderbolt Ross really should not be given control of a bunch of super enhanced people. As we think about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Baron Zemo, Helmut Zemo from Civil War, comes back. He's already been teased with the full purple mask and all. And one of the things that is being kind of insinuated is that Zemo might try to help Bucky and Sam try to take down US agent or Taskmaster or some of the Thunderbolts, but then gets wrapped up with the Thunderbolts himself. There is some indication that Zemo might become part of the Thunderbolts, which is a little bit of fair comeuppance from him. He did use mind control on Bucky and Winter Soldier, and he did it for his own purposes. And you know what? If you get your mind controlled, don't play with other people. I don't know how I feel about him becoming a Thunderbolt. I do like the idea that Bucky would have to swallow how much he hates Zemo and work with him towards some end. There is also big time rumors. I say big time in that no one says anything, but a set photo that was leaked has very suspicious markings. So Wolverine might come. There is a set photo from Falcon and the Winter Soldier that is allegedly in one of the mystical islands that Wolverine was always kind of in and out of. Wolverine heavily involved in Japan for a long time. And one of these was it's hard to describe. It's like a gargoyle head. It's Japanese. I'm going to butcher the name of what kind of face it is, but essentially the biker gang that Falcon and the Winter Soldier seem to be squaring off with, is wearing the face of this Japanese symbol for a spirit that is heavily associated with Wolverine. So there is every chance Wolverine gets leaked in the Disney Plus series, which would make sense. Kevin Feige did not leak anything about Avengers or X-Men or Fantastic Four during Comic-Con a couple of years ago, because they probably were working on just tacking them along into each of the different shows and movies that he had coming out. In Black Widow, you could easily sort of integrate them in a bunch of different ways. Taskmaster could be a way to integrate a mutant. I don't know that they'll do it because Taskmaster is already Taskmaster. Taskmaster is also allegedly the guy who trains U.S. Agent, the new Captain America. So he trains him how to fight like Steve. Because Taskmaster's ability is once he watches you fight, he can perfectly mimic your style. So he mimics every member of the Avengers. He mimics Black Widow, Hawkeye, Steve, you name it, you got it. And he's able to mimic their weapons too, or get them manufactured. He doesn't like just blink and a new weapon that's identical to an Avengers weapon emerges, but you get what I mean. What this means for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, potentially it's doing a lot of heavy lifting. It has 9 filming days left and quarantine has not been lifted. They were trying, last active rumor I read, to get all the actors to go back to, I think it was Prague, to get their quarantine done. Sort of an NBA bubble style. They get the whole team somewhere and just keep them there for a couple of weeks, test them, make sure everyone's fine, and then finish. They have 9 days left. That just, God, feels so achievable. And yet Batman shut down in 4 days. The Robert Pattinson Batman opened and 4 days later shut down. And Pattinson got COVID. So, I don't know that Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan are necessarily throwing themselves in the path of COVID for us. I don't blame them. However, this means that Black Widow, which has been pushed until November, must come out first because they have to establish the Thunderbolts a little bit. But then we need Falcon and the Winter Soldier as the next offering because it's going to set up where Bucky and Sam go after Endgame. It's going to set up how the political atmosphere post-blip has been developed, what the problems are that we're going to be dealing with for the next probably 10 Marvel movies. A big problem is going to be Thunderbolt Ross. And him trying to sort of scrounge power back from these enhanced people that he's been frustrated with since the Incredible Hulk. We're going to eventually have a Hulk-Red Hulk square-off. There's allegedly a Hulk-Wolverine square-off, which would be so great if they got Wolverine kind of started in the MCU and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because then you have plenty of time to figure out how you're buying Hulk from Universal. Disney should just buy Universal. It's worth it to have a Hulk-Wolverine movie. Hulk's contract, his rental agreement from Universal states that he cannot be the lead in any movie. He can only be a side character. So like Thor Ragnarok was probably as close as we were getting to Hulk in space, which was awesome. It was one of the greatest movies they put out. But if we want Hulk Wolverine, his name can't be in the title, and he can't have more than a certain amount of screen time or else he's considered a main character. So we have to fix this because we need that. We need that. Hulk versus Wolverine should happen. Falcon and the Winter Soldier will also apparently go through sort of some of the team rebuilding because Sam and Bucky go off on their own, but they're going to end the series by potentially reintegrating into the Avengers. Because again, you need the Avengers. You need someone to fill those roles. And Sam and Bucky are going to end, at least, realizing that U.S. Agent cannot be Cap and Sam needs to be. So that by the next time they're in a movie, Sam's in the suit. That is more time than I usually give you guys. It has been a marvelous lunch. I hope you were actually here and you didn't avoid the spoilers. I might have missed something. I might not have missed something. There's plenty more to talk about Captain Marvel next week. I miss all of my old students, my new students. It's awesome having you. Have a nice lunch, kids.